So recently I was feeling a little nostalgic. I had been ordering a couple things off of eBay, and one of the things I ended up with was a GTX 1070. I like it. Turns out it's still really good and really relevant. And with things like FSR, they more than make up for some of the things that would normally be lacking due to age, and the drivers are still supported. So I thought, well, what happens if I pair that with other stuff from around that time? Now, I happen to have an RX 480 at the time. I still have that card. It's in another build, not in this building. It's actually in a build called Traffic Cone. Yeah. Anyway, if I think about it, I'll go ahead and leave a thing up there. In any case, I thought, you know what? What if we look at a build from around 2018? So I went looking around to see how many of these parts I still had. I still had the X470 motherboard. I still had the original power supply, believe it or not. I did have the 1 terabyte drive, but it was a hard drive, and now I'm going to use an SSD. Don't hate me for that. I'm sure it'll be much quicker. And we want to test modern stuff on an older build. Along with that, 1700X, we've got memory, obviously DDR4 memory. I believe at that time you could max out a 1700X. I don't remember right offhand. I think it might have been 2400. 2133 or 2400. But I had all these parts that I could build, and I could put it in this LIPA, I believe it was a 502, it was either a 302 or a 502 case with an acrylic side panel with a window. That, don't hate me because it's an acrylic side panel, but at the time, this was a pretty decent build. And so I put all these pieces together, got everything all gathered up. I do know that the 1700X that I've got and a 1600. I've got both of these AM4. I used them a couple months back, probably about 6 or 7 months ago, playing around and testing and all that stuff. So I do know that these two processors still work. I was going to use the 1700X, popped it right into that motherboard, the X470, which I know it's compatible. I've used it in there before. And lo and behold, it didn't boot. And then I remembered why it didn't boot. That's because AMD, in an effort to continue to support the AM4 platform, did some BIOS updates where they didn't have enough room on that EEPROM, and so they left off earlier models of CPUs in favor of supporting, say, 3000 and 5000 generation CPUs. When they're trying to, Ryzen 3 and stuff like that, or the 5000 series chips, they dropped the support for the 1000 series, and I believe some of the 2000, like the some like 2200 or 2400 Gs and stuff like that. In any case, Zen and Zen Plus, that was out. It wouldn't work. But I do have a 3600X. Now, obviously, I have a 3700X, but I wanted to see if we were just going to look at your average build, a 3600X, very popular. The GTX 1070, very popular video card. That X470 motherboard, very solid. We're going to go ahead and use an SSD. I've got all my games on SSD anyway, so they're just a USB 3 connection. Boom, plug them in and keep on going. Put them in that LIPA case that's got plenty of room for fans and other drives and all that stuff. And we started her up and we let her rip. Now, I don't know what I was expecting here. I think I just wanted to see how well it would do and if it would still keep up. Because there are some times when we're using older hardware, didn't realize quite, put everything together. But this 3600X, you could also use 3200 speed memory on it. 3200 megatransfers per second. It came out in July of 2019. So when we couldn't do the 2018 build, we started the 2019 build. And so we're looking at something that is now about 6 years old, 6.5 years old, or around 6 years old. So we put this all together with a 3600X. We booted it right up and we started testing. Like I said, I don't know what I was expecting here. I was not expecting it to turn out as good as it did, I don't believe. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that now, even though NVIDIA is only supporting their DLSS on their 20 series and above, anything with RTX, AMD did us a solid by going back and supporting even some of their old GPUs, some of their old graphics cards. So the RTX 1070 is one of those that's supported with FSR. And so as we go through here, we're going to see games on DX12, Tomb Raider, and then Borderlands 3 that had a DX11 version and now a DX12 version. We're going to see FSR in use on Cyberpunk, and it's going to make a little bit of a difference. So I thought, all right, we'll just go ahead and do 1080p because that's what we're looking at. And then I kind of thought, well, maybe I don't want to stop at 1080p. So we're going to show you those numbers first. And they start out actually maybe just a little bit better than I thought, but pretty solid. Anywhere from 1080p high being 91 frames per second on Shadow of the Tomb Raider to 115 for 1080p low. Very, like I said, starting off very solid here. No problems at all. Borderlands, same type of thing. 70 for a high. 1080p high and 125 for 1080p low. You got that 103 sitting right there in the middle in 1080p medium. Anywhere from 63 frames per second to 85 frames per second in Cyberpunk. Now, when I first got Cyberpunk, I was running, I believe it was a 3700X and an RTX 2070. And at 1080p high, if I remember correctly, it was 42 frames per second. And I thought I was doing good because there was people doing reviews on this game that were getting like 65, 68 frames per second. And I thought I was actually doing pretty well because that RTX 2070 was doing okay. Now, that was just straight up. That didn't include any kind of ray tracing or anything like that. But I thought I was doing pretty well here. Well, now we're in 1080p, FSR 2.1, which is the default. And we're getting over 60 frames per second on 1080p high. And over 80 frames per second on 1080p low, so you can see it right there, stair steps, 63, 73, and 85. So getting better on an older card than we were getting when the game came out, which is great because that means they've been optimizing the game, but it also means that these other drivers, these other upscalers like FSR, are also working and doing some heavy lifting for us too to make this older hardware last a little bit longer. I did go ahead and do 1440, and if you notice there's a couple of games I skipped, that's because I'm putting them on the same slide. But we went back and did those same 3 games in 1440, 60 frames per second, very solid in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, although this game doesn't need to run at 60 frames per second, up to 80 frames per second when we're talking about 1440p low. We range anywhere from 47 to 89. I think I would just leave this on 1440 medium and have at it on Borderlands 3. Worked fine. Temperatures also. Borderlands 3 is one of those that usually makes my GPU temps jump up in the mid 70s, higher 70s every once in a while, depending on the card and the case. It dips into or comes up to the 80s or so. This stayed like 70, 71. Very, very cool, even when it was trying to work its butt off, sitting there at 1440 on ultra and badass settings. I was pretty happy with this. This MSI card just kept pulling away. It just kept on going. It was pretty interesting and pretty impressive. Whoever owned this card before me, yeah, thank you, because you took very good care of it and it's still running great. Anyway, 47 frames per second all the way up to almost 90 at 1440 in Borderlands. Cyberpunk, again, we're talking 42. That number sounds familiar. That's because that's what I was getting at 1080p high with an RTX 2070. The optimization has done much better here. We're getting a 1070 running at 42 on 1440p high and 66 frames per second on low. So again, you could probably stick this right in the middle, lock it down at about 50 frames per second and be really happy there. 1440 medium is looking like a good setting for this card 6 years later. Actually, this card is 7 years old, but the CPU is 6 years old. Then I went back and Black Myth Wukong we took a look at. I was actually surprised that this did as well, because I've seen this struggle sometimes. I've seen it do fairly well sometimes. For instance, the 7500F sitting in the neighborhood of about 115 frames per second, so it is considerably higher than this setup we've got here. But still, when you're talking about 60 frames per second, that's pretty solid on a high setting. And I'm sure if you wanted to drop the settings down, the detail down on 1440, you'd probably be just fine with Black Myth Wukong. Then our esports title, over 120 at 1440 and 1080 both. Very good, very playable, very smooth. Didn't have any problems, any hitches, anything. I played both of these on a 10-minute run through on just practice with bots, and very, very smooth. I usually, when I'm playing around, just messing around, benchmarking, whatever, I always try to get at least 600 points. I try to lead and get 600 points, and on both of these setups, I got almost 700, which was a little bit surprising. I don't usually test in a spot that's very comfortable. So a lot of times if I'm sitting there crouched over and the keyboard's sitting in my lap and the mouse is off to the side or whatever, and for me to do that well with this setup, that just tells you how smooth it did go and how easy it was to play, even though I was in some kind of weird position where I was trying to play with the keyboard and the mouse and everything. Still, it worked great. Yeah, I've got no complaints here at all. In fact, I've got no complaints of the whole build. I don't even mind that case has an acrylic side panel because it still looks pretty good. Didn't put it there. I did at one time have RGB in there. I don't right now, but it looks perfectly fine. Runs perfectly fine. That case still has plenty of room for plenty of fans, front, back, and top, and it has a lot of space for drives if I want to put more drives in there. And really, it was probably ahead of its time, and it's a shame that they don't make more cases like that now. Everything's gotten smaller and weirder, and now we've got all these aquarium type cases, and I'm guilty of that as well. I bought a King 95 not too long ago, and that's where my new build is going into. We spoke of the 7500F. There's actually a different processor in there now, but in any case, this case, yeah, yeah, is that too many cases? It probably is, but I'm not complaining. If you're not complaining, if you want to complain, put it down in the comments. Okay. Regardless, this worked out really, really well. I was happy with the airflow. I was happy with the temperatures. I was happy with the performance of both of these parts, the motherboard, except for the fact that, and it's already been addressed. I mean, newer motherboards do have more memory that you can store more CPUs on, but you almost have to credit AMD for that. You almost have to credit them for the slight, because even though the EEPROM didn't have enough to keep all the CPUs that board will fit, part of the reason why is because of the longevity of the board. They are still making CPUs that will fit in that motherboard, the AM4. They're still producing processors for AM4, and you got to give AMD some credit there. They have really, really gone above and beyond to support this platform, and I hope they do the same for AM5. And maybe even AM6 beyond that. I don't know, maybe 6 years from now. Who knows? Anyway, that is all I have for this time. I just wanted to take a look at this. I was feeling a little bit nostalgic, I guess, because I was buying stuff on eBay and the GTX 1070. I didn't have one of those when they came out. It wasn't until just now. I've had other cards, but it wasn't until just now that I got my hands on one to play with one. And it's like, you know, what would it have been like? And I don't know what it would have been like. I know what it's like now. I know it's a strong performer now, but I think a lot of that has to do with some of the games that were out, whatever, being optimized, and the software, the rendering software also being optimized. The drivers for video cards are much, much better in some cases. Now, we're not even going to talk about the 5000 series NVIDIA. We're not going to talk about the fiasco of drivers and all that stuff going on now, but older cards with some of the stuff that's incorporated into the games, some of the enhancements, turns out works pretty well. And especially for this card, I really, really like, even though it's a big monster of a card, it's still only 2 slots, and it still stays very, very cool and quiet. So again, whoever had this card before me, I'm very happy. They took care of it a lot. They took care of it very, very well. I'm the original owner of the CPU, so I know I took care of it. But yeah, I'm happy with the way that it worked out. Will I keep this together? I don't know. I will probably end up using these parts in other stuff with newer pieces, except for the case. I don't know what I'm doing with the case yet. Anyway, that is all I have. I just wanted to go back and take a look at it and see what was going on, and I'm glad I did. So if you got any thoughts, you liked the video, got anything out or anything like that, go ahead and throw a like on it if you don't mind. Go ahead and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. We kind of plateaued at about 1,500. I'd like to kind of get that going again and shoot above that, but that would be you guys' help, and I dearly appreciate it. Thank you. If you don't mind, check out socials. But if you don't do any of that stuff, you don't want to like, subscribe, check out socials or anything like that, at least do me one favor, and that's be good to each other. Doesn't cost anything to be kind. Take a few moments out of your day to wave, smile, say good morning, hold the door open, whatever. You might make somebody's day. Seeing somebody smile or have a better day might make your day a little bit better too. Yeah. So that is all I got for right now. Like I said, there's something else going on. I found something on sale. Anybody that saw my short a couple days ago knows that I bought something before I was ready to buy something. But that's a different story for a different time. And with that being said, that's all I got. So I'll see you later.